Welcome to UCF Knightline, your source for UCF sports and former player information. Hello, Night Nation. This is Andrew Phegley coming to you from the 1148 studios, and this is episode number 24 of the UCF Knightline Podcast. And joining me in the studio today is
Trylko. Glad to be back in the studio and not on the phone as I have been the last 2 weeks.
It sounds a lot better than phone, but by the phone we will have two people today. We will do part one with Brandon Helwig of a two-part series. The second part will be next week. That makes sense. And then also we're going to have John Swift by phone and doing a statistical breakdown of why we did not fare so well against the Power 5 teams this year. Joining us by the phone is Brandon Helwig, publisher of UCFsports.com. Brandon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you guys doing?
We're good. We are going to talk a little bit about, kind of do a season recap here of the UCF football season. We're fully into basketball already, but we're going to talk just a little bit more about UCF football. We're going to kind of run through the scores of the games and talk a little bit about each game and just overall grades and things like that. Brandon, would you like to start us off of giving us like A, B, C, D, E, F grade?
Yeah, that's kind of a good question. I've kind of debated that. I think had UCF won the bowl game, and that would have given them their 10th win, to combine that with the second conference championship, I would said, you know, although you would have liked to make the Access Bowl, I said I think you would have graded the team an A. I think it would have been an A+, you know, had they, you know, gone and won an Access Bowl. So I would have said A or A-. I'm still going to say A-. I really have a hard time going down maybe a letter grade to a B or B+ just because you didn't win that bowl game. I think that's something you really would have liked to have, though. You know, anytime, I mean, your goal every year, as Coach O'Leary says, is to win a conference championship, and they did that. You know, unfortunately, it was shared by two other teams. But it's kind of hard to nitpick too much. You know, maybe somewhere between a B+ to A-, somewhere in there. Maybe I'll round up into A-.
All right, that sounds good. Trace, what grade would you give the football season this year?
I think Brandon's a little bit more optimistic than I am. I'd say being 0-3 against the Power 5 teams, the Connecticut loss, and losing the bowl game, I'd put him at a B-. Though I don't necessarily think in a season in which we were replacing Blake Bortles, Storm Johnson, some players on the offensive line, that is necessarily a bad thing. And I agree that winning the American Athletic Conference was a good thing, but I'd put him at a B-.
B-. All right. I'm going to say B+. And the one thing that I am going to say is the reason why I'm giving that is basically the record on the road, number one, which was 3-2. And then 0-3 versus the Power 5 teams, the bowl loss, which is included in that. And then 0-2 neutral site, which normally we don't play two neutral site games, but one was Penn State, you know, and the other was the bowl game. So that's why I'm giving B+, because we were replacing all those guys. Number one, that's my plus. And, you know, there was some things that definitely have come out of this year that have been pretty good. We found Justin Holman, which I don't really know if we knew. Obviously, going into Penn State, we didn't know what we had. So, you know, I'm giving it a B+. What was our best win? Brandon, what would you say the best win of the season was?
That's a good question. Let me think about that a little bit. I mean, I guess you would have to say the best win might have been the last one. You know, the East Carolina game on the road. You know, on the Brashad Perryman Hail Mary. You know, while that play kind of encapsulates that game, but you know, you really had that game in control, and it never should have come down to that point. I mean, East Carolina never should have had a lead in that game with the way UCF was playing. Got into the red zone too many times, get too many field goals, and not enough touchdowns. I mean, it really could have had a much larger margin that would have, you know, totally eliminated any hope for an ECU comeback, which they did in the fourth quarter. it would have to be that one, or possibly the Houston game, which was another, last play or last 30-second play where Brandon Alexander pulled the arm back as Houston quarterback Greg Ward was about to score for what would have been a game-winning touchdown for Houston. Forced that fumble there to seal the victory. There really isn't. I don't know. I don't know if there's really a signature win in terms of this season. Not like last year. Obviously, there were multiple ones. Between Louisville and Baylor being the biggest. There was a lot of signature wins a year ago. I don't know if there really is one this year.
Okay.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, Trace. What would you say was our maybe even signature win that Brandon just said? I mean, if there was, or the best one that you liked. What would that be for you?
I don't know if there was a signature win, but for me, the best win was the BYU game. I thought that was the most exciting. It was electric. It was at home. Even though the finish at the East Carolina game was certainly, I think, for most fans, the most memorable because it came at the end of the season. For me, that night being at home, the win over BYU was the best win.
Okay. I'm going to pick SMU with our 53-7 victory over SMU because, number one, it was at home. It was exciting. It was 53-7. And, that's what I thought that we should have been doing to more teams all year long, and we weren't. So I thought that, we were really coming around at that point. It was late in the season a little bit, only had 2 games left to go, but I kind of thought that was a turning point and we were going to see more victories by scores like that. But, it never happened. So that would be mine, though. That would be my favorite one just because I thought that we should have had more victories like that.
I think what's good about a win like that is that you can relax as a fan and you don't have to worry throughout the game.
Absolutely.
You can just watch some players that you don't get to see a lot of come in. So maybe in that regard, I agree with you.
Yeah, and it wasn't, we weren't hanging on and having cardiac moments like some of the other ones. I think that definitive wins are something that we kind of lack with all those cardiac moments, and that's something that I look forward to having more of. Definitive, pounding wins. All right, so next question, worst loss. Brandon...
Easy.
I have an idea what this is going to be, but Brandon, what was the worst loss? There's not too many of them, thank goodness. But
yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty easy. Maybe you can say worst loss other than UConn, but yeah, clearly it was that UConn game. I was there. I for anyone that wasn't, it was incredibly cold and it rained the entire game. I know it wasn't always visible on the television broadcast, but it was a mist that after a while you were soaked in it. And I know that's not an excuse, but it's one of the games you can't really explain. I mean, I don't doubt that, UCF is the better team than UConn, but they weren't on that day. And unfortunately, it's not a game you can get back to. I don't know if it really ended up making a difference in the grand scheme of things. If UCF had won that game and won the bowl game, I think, had a chance to maybe finish the season as a ranked team. It didn't matter anyway. They lost the bowl game. I think Boise was always going to that Access Bowl as long as they didn't slip up, which they didn't. UCF maybe could have been, more mentioned as a team being in that mix, had they not lost that game. Obviously, they wouldn't have to share the conference championship either. So you wouldn't have Memphis and Cincinnati, claiming their share if UCF would have taken care of business and gone 8-0, So, yeah, without a doubt, clearly one of the worst losses really for UCF in the last, 5 years probably.
It's a good reminder, too, that when you turn the ball over 5 times, as Florida State found out the other night, you're likely to lose a game.
That's true. Okay, so if, Trace, do you have a different game that, or are you going to agree with the UConn as well? I mean, I agree with the UConn. I do want to talk about another game, but do you have anything else?
It's hard to disagree that from start to finish, that just the performance of the team, that is a disappointing loss, especially when you look at what UConn did the rest of the year. That's a game you just cannot lose, even on the road.
Absolutely. One of the worst losses, I would say, in UCF history. But my pick for the worst loss myself is Penn State. In Ireland, 26-24, we lost that game just because it was the season opener. it was such a big deal to go to Ireland, and we just weren't sure of ourselves, period, as a team. We started the wrong quarterback, obviously. We, made some other mistakes. Our defense wasn't, obviously didn't have their feet under them to let them drive down the field after Justin Holman did come in and, really turn it on and show what he was made of and what he was going to be there in the season. Probably showing us what he's going to be like in the future, able to come off the bench cold and do what he did. So, that's the one that I'm going to pick. I'm going to pick Penn State loss in Dublin, but I also definitely agree with, the UConn thing.
To talk real quick about that at Penn State, yeah, I do agree with that. If you had to eliminate UConn, that is, there were a lot of disappointing aspects. You mentioned the UCF secondary allowed Christian Hackenberg to have a career day, which it turned out Hackenberg had a fairly mediocre year. Not as good as his stats were on that day, and the fact that you get down to a final drive and you can't stop them. And the UCF defense was supposed to be the strength going into it. I know you can argue about quarterbacks, starting the right guy, wrong guy, all you want, but it is what it is. The defense had an opportunity to get a stop and win the game and couldn't do it. So as far as the most heartbreaking loss, I definitely agree that would be the Penn State opener.
Well, since we're talking about the Penn State game, do you see some comparisons between that, our first game with Penn State, and the last game in that the defense, which we thought was the strong point of the team all season long, let us down in the bookends, both the opening game and the final game?
Yeah, I just tend to think that UCF's schedule kind of played into that, and maybe a belief that the defense was better than they really were. And when you look at the stats, top 10 statistically in this category and that category, but those statistics were really padded against some really bad offensive teams in the American. I mean, you had a stretch there where you were playing teams that, were all ranked in the hundreds in terms of offense. And I think that sort of maybe, led to, I don't know if I'm going to say overconfident, but a belief that the defense might have been better than they really were. Because when they played, I know you mentioned earlier going 0-3 against the Power 5 teams, when you played teams that, had better talent across the board, UCF's defense wasn't as good as they were against the American teams, Penn State, Missouri, and NC State. So I think that played a little bit into it, is that a very friendly schedule helped to pad those stats a little bit.
Okay, so we're going to go on next question here. That you're absolutely right, though. I totally agree with what you're saying, Brandon. The next question is going to be, who is the most important returning player on the offense?
The most important returning player offensively, I don't see how it's not Justin Holman. I see he'll be going into, spring ball as the incumbent starter, and everything's going to go through him. I am anxious to see, what kind of improvement Tyler Harris has made in terms of potentially competing with him. But I figured I'd be shocked if Holman isn't the starter come next September 5th, I believe, is the first game against FIU. So, I would have to say Holman. It's a big offseason for him. He improved steadily as the season went on. He's not where you want to be quarterback-wise. A lot of things we talked about early on in terms of seeing the field, touch on his passes, things like that did improve. But he's not a finished product yet. And he seems to play better when he's pushed, and so I'm really curious to see if maybe Tyler Harris can push him a little bit this offseason.
Yeah, I'd like to see that too. I'm very interested to see Harris and what he did great in the high school games and on his highlight reels and all that stuff, but I can't wait to see him come in and see what he can do in at least the kind of practice game thing and what he can do in practice. Trace, what's your opinion on this?
Well, obviously the quarterback is a critical part of the game, so tend to agree with Brandon on that. However, I would point out that I think where we need to improve significantly is in the running game. And Will Stanback is critical to me in that. I understand that the changes on the offensive line, but to me, Will Stanback has to have a better year. And Coach O'Leary said something one coach's luncheon where he said sometimes guys are better coming off the bench instead of being the starters. And it seemed like a little bit of a swipe at Stanback, that maybe he was better in his role the previous year than he was in his role this year. Quick question to Brandon on the quarterback situation. See on the message board some talk of Gator quarterback Jeff Driscoll's name being mentioned coming to UCF. Is there anything to that, or is he on everybody's message board being mentioned as a possible transfer?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm buying that rumor right now. When I heard a week or two ago that he was focused on Duke, Louisiana Tech, I think was another one, a few different things. I don't see how he makes sense for UCF. I don't see why he'd want to come to UCF. I think he'd want to go to a situation where there's more of a wide open opportunity. And frankly, I don't see why UCF would want him coming in and just creating unneeded controversy when I don't, could he be successful at UCF? I don't know. To me, it just doesn't make sense on either side. So I haven't heard anything myself that has indicated that there's any validity to it. Not to say it's not true. I know he just got his release from Florida. I guess, prior to the bowl game, even though he did play in that bowl game, and I guess we'll be, talking to coaches here, probably today, tomorrow, wherever he would go. I'm sure most school starts for most schools, about a week plus. So I haven't heard anything about that. So, but to piggyback what you said about running game, if you could count the most important player on offense coming back, if you could count the offensive line as one player, I'd pick the offensive line. I think that was many times a weak link this season for UCF, and frankly, they just got to get better. I know it was kind of exposed a little bit again in that NC State bowl game. I know we're talking about the secondary for an offense. It seems like between quarterback, running back, and offensive line. But I think if you talk about running game, I think it all starts with that offensive line, which frankly underperformed. Obviously, when you compare it to the unit a year before that had the McRae twins.
Absolutely. You nailed it on the head there. That's where I was going to go with this. Both of you picked my people. So
you need to go first on your next question.
I guess
then.
I need to go first. All right. The next question then, biggest loss on the offense. Who would be your player that it's going to be a huge loss to lose this year as a senior or whatever?
So hard to pick one. I guess if just to be fair to pick one, I know you can kind of lump the wide receivers together into one person. I'm gonna, gosh, that's tough. I'm debating, between. I know Josh Reed has been such a good blocker. I'm kind of going back towards my head about Rennell Hall and J.J. Where I'm just gonna go. I'll go ahead and pick J.J. Wharton just to pick one. Been such a sure-handed receiver for his 4 years. Was a big component in the punt return game. Holder played so many different roles. It was tough to see him go out the way he did. You mentioned that SMU game, on that bad snap as the holder tried to run around on the extra point, trying to make something happen. I guess he planted funny on his knee and didn't even know it right away. He tore his ACL and was out for the rest of the year, and everything. Just had surgery a few weeks back on that. He just was such an important part of the receiving game. Everyone remembers the catch he had at Temple last year. I think you can obviously lump in the other wide receivers with him as well, because guys like Rennell Hall played such huge roles as well, and not just offensively, but on special teams, the kick return. I think that's going to be a really tough guy to replace, especially when you see the wide receiver core coming back next year. Not a lot of experience. Brashad Perriman's status is still kind of undetermined whether he for sure is coming back or not. So there are some question marks as far as receiver goes.
Absolutely, and I would tend to agree with you as well. But I'm going to give this to Trace real quick, and then I'll come back with what I have to say about that.
You had your chance right there to go second.
Well, I'm a nice guy, so
I would say that if Rashad Perriman does not return, that would be our biggest loss. But from a fan standpoint, an excitement standpoint, and the versatility that he showed in different capacities for the team, J.J. Wharton. I'm going to miss seeing him, and I think he would have been a difference maker for us in the NC State bowl game.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to agree with J.J. because J.J., like Brandon said, like you said, he's done so much. It's been he's a guy that went out there with his heart and played every single down every time, and that's what a real football player is, and we will definitely, obviously, miss that. Also, I'm going to say, though, Rennell Hall, because he has been an incredibly electric player. I think this year, it's very unfortunate that he had to play his senior year with the injury that he had in the preseason, really, and just, had to have the year that he did. He was never 100%, I don't think, really ever. Yeah. So that's a bummer, and I'm going to miss him, besides him and JJ are the two. I'm going to pick two because I can. So those are the two that I will definitely miss the most, just for exciting and we have to replace them by having someone that can do those kind of exciting things. And sometimes those players are few and far between, so I can't wait to see who the next one is, to be honest with you. What's next for UCF? Signing day, spring game, stuff like that. What's in between there? Now and
the most immediate is getting this coaching staff finalized. Tyson Summers, defensive coordinator, last week took the same job at Colorado State. I'm kind of kicking myself for not kind of realizing that I should have recognized the possibility of that before it happened. I mean, I already knew that, Tyson Summers and Mike Bobo, who was the offensive coordinator, quarterback coach at Georgia, he accepted that job at Colorado State. I knew they were good friends. Both are from Southern Georgia. Tyson Summers was a GA at Georgia for a year, and Mike Bobo has basically been in Georgia his whole life. Star quarterback, GA, and then a coach and offensive coordinator. So I knew there was a relationship there, and it kind of happened. Florida hired Jim McElwain from Colorado State and got a pretty hefty buyout. I believe it was $7 million. So they've got an expanded coaching budget to go and hire coaches with. And so Tyson Summers accepted, I believe he's going to go from 180 to 310 or 320, somewhere in there in terms of a yearly salary. So it really was a no-brainer. UCF can't compete with that kind of money. And he can coach with his close friend that he's known for years and kind of can control his own defense. And if for any defensive coordinator that's been at UCF, if anyone knows Coach O'Leary's background, it's on defense. So you're always going to have him, kind of over your shoulder. And, which is a good thing, I guess, in some regards, if you're a fan, to make sure that everything is being done the way it should. But I'm sure it can be frustrating if you're a defensive coordinator. So Coach Summers will get an opportunity to kind of run his own show in Colorado, Fort Collins, Colorado. So we got to finalize that job, and reports have been surfacing as we're reporting this podcast that defensive back coach Kurt Callahan has indeed accepted a job at University of Florida. So he's going to be gone as well. So right now you've got two defensive openings, one of which would, assumingly, one of those linebacker or defensive backs would be taking the play, whoever the new defensive coordinator is, and sure will coach one of those positions. So, we'll see whether if anything else kind of happens coaching-wise, but there are some immediate issues that need to be addressed, really in the next week or so.
Brandon, do you expect any more coaches to leave?
I think it's a distinct possibility. I haven't heard anything that was a done deal yet. Some people thought, some people at the beginning of the year, this was O'Leary's last season. When that Bruce Feldman report came out, it looks like that is not happening, that he is coming back. I do always, when O'Leary is asked this, and I know Shannon Owens-Green of the Orlando Sentinel had another quote from him a few days ago, he always throws in an extra word in terms. He goes, I expect to be back. He didn't say, I'm coming back, I'm definitely coming back, I'm returning. He threw in the word, I expect to come back. So I always kind of wonder if he's kind of doing that on purpose. Like, he loves to troll media, troll the fans, but it seems like he's always adding another kind of word in there that kind of opens the door a little bit. But then again, I don't see him retiring this year from everything I hear that he is coming back. But I always kind of wonder when he's not as emphatic as he could be about that. And the other one is, Charlie Tapp, offensive coordinator. Some have thought, he's at the age where, maybe he just wants to retire and kind of be done with it. And, he likes to play golf, travel, some things that, maybe he might like to enjoy. So, I'm kind of wondering if there's a chance that might happen. Some people thought it might, but, that has been announced yet. So I'm kind of curious if that's the last change or not. I think if you're UCF, I think you'd love him to come back. I think Charlie Tapp has been such a big part in the transformation of the offense as it came in 2009. If you could at least have him coming back for one more year, I think that would be, a big boost for the offense.
Yeah, these coaching changes definitely are going to have to be shored up, obviously. But is there any names that you had heard of that for the defensive coordinator position, or did we already talk about that?
Well, as far as getting names, it's not like with the way UCF works, it seems like, Leary a lot of times just has his guy and you just kind of find out after the fact. I mean, it doesn't always, it's not like a wide open search per se, but I don't know. He might have run out of people. Leary likes to hire people that he's worked with personally. That's kind of how he taps Paul Ferraro. He never actually coached a game. His defensive coordinator. That's another long story. We can talk about it another time, but he had worked with him before, and I kind of tapped him. And as soon as Jim Fleming was confirmed to be leaving to be the head coach of Rhode Island, I mean, Ferraro had that job. I mean, it wasn't really a search. So, but he in all honesty, he's probably I think he might have kind of run out of people like that in terms of people that he's very familiar with, he's worked with, he's coached with, and people that are ready to accept. That said, I don't know if there's any confirmed targets in terms of who has UCS interest. Coach Larry keeps us up pretty close to the vest. He likes to talk about being in the circle, and it's very tough to kind of get really good quality information if he maybe has a mix of people he's talked to or whatever. I mean, nothing has come out to really confirm any of that.
All right, that does it for part one of our interview with Brandon Helwig. Part two next week, so tune in for that. And now, a word from our sponsors. So, you know what they say, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We don't need to know about your fun-filled weekend in the City of Sin, but we hope you'll click the ad on our website. It's right there to the left, the one that screams you have to save up to 50% off your next trip to Vegas. Just click on the ad and we promise never to talk about what happened in Vegas. All right, Night Nation, I am joined by our Washington Bureau, John Swift. John, are you there?
I'm here, Andrew.
Did you have a good New Year and holidays?
Yeah, pretty good. Wish, obviously, last week we talked about the bowl game. Wish that would have been a W for the Knights, but getting over it, focusing on next season.
All right. Well, one last thing I think we want to talk about is what happened with us playing against Power 5 teams this year. It didn't turn out so well. And statistically, what did you find out that kind of hurt us or were good points or whatever there?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to look at us versus Power 5 in isolation because we had three opponents this year, Penn State, Missouri, and NC State. I think if preseason you asked, what the expectations were for UCF, I think that, finishing 9-4 was certainly probably where a lot of, true fans expected UCF to finish. Obviously, some hope for more upside, but when you look at the Power 5 teams we did face, Penn State, Mizzou, and NC State, and you break down each one, I don't think too many fans would have thought we would have gone into Missouri and beat them. But you look at that Penn State game in Ireland and then obviously the bowl game, both winnable games. We went 9-1 against non-Power 5 teams, which is a heck of a record, but 0-3 against Power 5 teams. So that kind of bears the question of what went wrong. And I posed a question earlier this year, asking if our offensive and defensive lines could line up against a quality Power 5 team going into a bowl game based on what we saw early in the season against Penn State and Mizzou. And obviously Missouri has a very talented defensive line and was really able to get after Justin Holman. And, his first start on the road was really a down moment for him. But, you kind of look statistically against how he did against the Power 5 teams versus non-Power 5 teams. And, we're giving up 440 yards to Power 5 teams this season, where we're only putting up 306. When you have that big of a delta, it usually leads to points. And if you look at the point spread, we're giving up 32.7 points per game to Power 5 teams while only scoring 20.3. So that's almost 13 points we're giving away to a Power 5 team. And I think going into the NC State game, we knew we'd have to play a good game. I think it surprised a few people at the talent levels we talked about last week. But, it was a game that we would have had to play, a very, very good game for us to win. I think the Penn State game, it's just kind of, playing UCF defense would have, gotten us a W. I said that we gave up 32.7 points per game to Power 5 teams. Against non-Power 5 teams, that number is only 16.8, and that includes that 37 points we gave to UConn. So you can kind of see, Power 5 teams statistically are scoring about double on us. And if you look at the teams, no powerful offenses. I mean, mediocre teams, when you kind of look across the Power 5, obviously Missouri finished, top 25, but I think most people would recognize that their offense is probably average amongst the Power 5. So it kind of goes back to the question of, how did we get beat? We're giving up more yards, we're not gaining. And I think one of the two key things I looked at were, a rushing game. It just seemed that against the Power 5 teams, we could not get anything going. The offensive line couldn't open up holes. Running backs weren't able to pick up chunk plays. And if you look, against the Power 5 teams, we had 24 yards rushing against Penn State, 90 against Mizzou, and 82 against NC State. That's for 2 yards a carry, 2.3 yards a carry, and 2.9 yards per carry. Interestingly enough, we also didn't have a rush over 20 yards against the Power 5 team. The longest run was, I think, 20 yards by Justin Holman against NC State. You kind of look at, our running backs underperformed all season, certainly couldn't get the running game going against Power 5 teams. And by the way, all three of those games against Power 5 teams, we were winning at some point in those games. So it wasn't, the Missouri game kind of got away at the end there, but all those games we were in, we had to play a little behind against NC State to come back, but, we led early. We led against Mizzou early, and then Penn State, we were winning there at the end and just couldn't stop them as they went down the field. So it's a little bit, frustrating, I think, as a fan base to, you have those expectations, had to go out and compete for national championships, but, certainly to go up against a 5-6 loss Power 5 team and be able to win those games, certainly I think from a competitive perspective, we're there, just that, we have to execute better. And I think we talked a little bit last week about certain plays, certain players who, kind of let down that didn't get us over that hump this year. The last perspective I really looked at was, third down efficiency, because that was something standing out to me every time against Power 5 team. It just seemed that, those drives stalled, we'd have them in a 3rd and 17 and they'd convert. So I went and looked at the stats there, and we were 19 for 51 on third down, which is 37% conversion rate. Where our opponents, our Power 5 opponents, were 26 of 47, which is 55%. So certainly we got crushed. Our offensive line got dominated, and we were not able to run the ball. And on third down, we basically let them do what they wanted and couldn't convert and stall drives on our side. And I think that kind of summed up the season as far as, why we had 4 losses and why we couldn't get over that hump of beating, mediocre Power 5 teams.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this had to do with the offensive line play. That's going to get better next year, I assume, and I hope. And I think that should help us out a little bit. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've been hearing, for a couple seasons now in the off-season in camp that O'Leary and his staff have praised the offensive linemen coming into the program as being, longer, rangier, more athletic than we've seen before. But, we just haven't seen the production on the offensive line, whether it be in run or pass block. Not sustaining blocks in the running game. You rarely see, as I mentioned, 20 yards against a Power 5 team with the longest run. And that was by Holman. That's not really a true run. I think on the season it was something like 32 yards or 35 yards. I can't remember the stat, but by standback. You'd hope that UCF, being kind of a team that was built on the run, would be able to get to those, big chunk yardage plays in the running game, and we just never saw that breakaway speed. And part of that is not only just opening up holes in the offensive line, but, getting to that second level, getting offensive line into the second level to seal off a block, to create that running lane, or receivers as well on the outside. So, I think from a blocking perspective, obviously up front we had problems. Receiving core, I think, did a pretty decent job. You didn't see a lot of guys giving up. Josh Reese, obviously, tremendous blocker. The offensive line, I think it'll be interesting to see. The other thing to think about historically here is, we moved from the MAC to Conference USA, now in the American. The quality level, although the bottom of the American is very weak, 4 or 5 of our games are more competitive than they were 2 or 3 years ago. So when we had, some outstanding offensive lineman like Josh Shitten, who's now in the NFL playing for the Green Bay Packers and one of the top offensive linemen in the NFL, and some other guys who had, shots in the NFL. There's certainly some great individuals, but some of the competition they were playing, teams like Rice a few years ago just don't have the size and athleticism on the line, where when we're going up against teams like, East Carolina, we face back in Conference USA, but, in theory, kind of moving to the American when we play Cincinnati finally next year, we're going to be going against some teams that have, and UConn as well, that, we're in a BCS conference prior and we're able to recruit with that and, still have some 4th and 5th year seniors who, came into those programs when they were, competitive. They were gunning for a BCS bowl game and, could get those 3- and 4-star offensive linemen. We're seeing, I think, a little bit of a weakness in what we've been able to bring in and coach up. But at the same time, I think we're facing a lot more talent kind of all around.
Yeah, I do think that the difference between Power 5 linemen and American and lower conferences is big, especially on the offense and defensive line. Those guys are much larger guys, and I think that hurts us quite a bit when it comes to that. So maybe we can find some guys that will do what we need to do, but I think that really is one of the keys of what's going on with the offensive and defensive line. You said it great there. All right. Is there anything else that you wanted to add there?
No, just kind of, looking forward to next year. We got some tough Power 5 teams with South Carolina and Stanford. Obviously, we don't know our fourth out-of-conference opponent, but, it'd be interesting to see. Those are kind of two more premier, even though they both struggled this year, Power 5 teams. So it'll be interesting to see if we can regroup this off-season. Obviously, we lose quite a few guys, and see if that offensive line and defensive line that pretty much stays the same can go out there and compete against that level next year. Certainly, I think this year was a little bit of a disappointment.
Absolutely. We will be breaking down every position this year on the Knightline Podcast in the off-season, and you will be a huge part of that. We will have you back soon to talk about that for sure. All righty? Thank you very much from the Washington Bureau, John Swift. Have a good week, and we will talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, and charge on.
That's John Swift with a good stat breakdown, Andrew. He's a good addition to the program. He really likes studying the numbers.
I like him.
I like him, too. I hope our listeners like him. Thank you, Knight Nation. You're liking us on Facebook. You're following us on Twitter. You're listening to us on YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, and via www.ucfknightlinepodcast.com. We also want to hear from you. Give us a call anytime, 407-205-7427. That's 407-205-7427. Leave a question or a comment. We would like to include you in next week's Knightline Podcast.
You know, that sounds like that you've done something like that before.
I have done that a time or three.
That was like live. That was awesome. He did a great job, folks. All right, we're going to go back and talk a little bit about bowl games that the American played in. Cincinnati and Virginia Tech played in the Military Bowl. Virginia Tech won 33-17. Houston and Pittsburgh played in the Armed Forces Bowl, and Pittsburgh lost to Houston 35-34. East Carolina and Florida played in the Birmingham Bowl, and East Carolina lost to Florida 28-20.
Overall, Andrew, the AAC went 2-3 in bowl games, which also included UCF's loss to North Carolina State and St. Pete, and BYU losing to Memphis. I think a couple of interesting things on those last three you mentioned. Cincinnati losing to Virginia Tech. Houston beat Pittsburgh, but that was an exciting game. I flipped off. It was 31-6. And Houston roared back, a couple of late touchdowns, a couple of onside kick recoveries. You don't see that every day. And then, of course, East Carolina, their last regular season game, they lose to UCF on the Hail Mary. And in this game, they throw an interception in the end zone as time's dwindling down. One common theme, though, these teams that we're talking about, Florida was 6-5, Pittsburgh 6-6, North Carolina State 7-5, lower tier in their respective leagues, yet the AAC teams struggled or lost, which I think, again, goes back to show you the gulf of talent difference between the Power 5 and the rest, especially in the line play.
Well, maybe they need to make a championship for the rest then. Maybe it would be good if the Power 5 teams went on and did their own thing. I don't know. We can talk about that later. I'm not a big fan of that, but, whatever. It seems like there is a big, huge difference, and it's not so fun to be on the other side of that, and we are, and we will talk way more about this in the future. Our players do pretty well in the NFL, though, because we've got 5-6 players in the playoffs this weekend. Kamar Aiken, the Ravens, Ja Reed for the Ravens, Matt Prater and the Lions. They're playing actually right now while we're watching this, and Troy Davis from the Cowboys is there too, and then Josh Sitton with the Packers. The playoffs are exciting, and it's exciting to be able to tune into games like this and see multiple UCF former players.
Knights in the NFL, we've gotten used to it now. We've got 18, 19 players in the NFL, and as you mentioned, half a dozen or so still alive in the playoffs.
We played Temple today in basketball, and the score was 84-78. Temple, we lost by 6 points only, and I think that's saying something against a team that has wins over Kansas and the defending national championship team, UConn.
It was quote-unquote, a good loss on the road for UCF, a team that is going to struggle in AAC play. There are haves and have-nots in the AAC. I think we're starting to see a clear divide. Your UConn, Temple, SMU, Cincinnati in that upper tier, and, of course, UCF in that lower tier. Just last week, home opener against Tulsa goes right down to the wire, but UCF loses by 2. Now they lose by 6-8 points on the road, and now go to Houston on Tuesday. Would really be good to get a win against probably a middle-of-the-pack Cougar team.
Well, Donnie Jones says how young this team is, how young the team is, how young the team is, how young the team is. They're going to learn. They're going to learn. They're going to learn. In his press conferences, to be honest with you, that's pretty much what he says. That's pretty much the gist of what Donnie Jones says. But it's true. They are young. They're going to get better and better as we go. It's going to take some time.
Why do you think, though, that they are necessarily, as a team, going to get better? I've asked this question before. Which players get better under Coach Jones? I like the talent in B.J. Taylor and Adonis Enriquez. I also liked Casey Wilson where he was 2 years ago, and his skills have regressed. So I don't know why you automatically assume that under Jones's coaching, this team's going to get better.
Well, I've not followed UCF basketball for long, but I think for some reason that this team is going to learn what they're doing, because today, playing to a 6-point loss at Temple, that, you know, with the victories that they have under their belt, they're playing with the big dogs. I mean, they're definitely playing with the big dogs, and we got really close to having that game. We've started off absolutely awesome. So I think that this is going to work out. I don't think that we're going to be in the tournament this year, but I think, you know, it's coming for sure.
It's coming. 4 wins. That was last year's tally. Can we beat 4 wins in AAC play this year?
Absolutely. I have no
wager on that.
Sure. I've done wagers on this thing before. The last one I never had to, pay out on because he's no longer here. So,
well, then I don't want to wager with you. I might not be around.
Just so you know, that's how I got out of But
well, when you look at, you say, okay, there are a couple of teams that you think we might be able to beat. South Florida, Tulane. Oh, Tulane beat Memphis this weekend. So maybe Tulane is not the gimme game.
I don't think Memphis this year is the team that they have been in the past, though. I don't think that they're as high caliber of a team. So I don't think that that's Temple beat Memphis as well, and I think that they put it to them pretty good, didn't they, last week?
Well, but still, when you hold out hope and promise that the team is going to develop, I still see a team 12, 13 games in that still lacks fundamentals, that's being out-rebounded on the offensive side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball, and they're a turnover factory. So where is the improvement? And by scheduling these games against Stetson and Florida Atlantic, we were supposed to toughen up, get a bit stronger. Instead, we played a weak schedule that now has not prepared us for a stronger AAC slate.
I disagree. I think that those games have prepared us, and we're going to get better. The guys have to learn. I'm going with Donnie Jones on this. How did the women do this week?
Now, on a positive note, unlike the men who are 0-2 in AAC play, the women are 2-0 in AAC play. They got a win 76-70 over Tulsa.
All righty. Next week, the second part of our Brandon Helwig interview, and we will be back. Charge on, folks. Thank you for listening. Andrew Phegley.
Trace Trylko.
See ya.
UCF, charge on to the field. With our spirits, we'll never yield. Black